All right?
Yes, that looks perfect.
Okay. Let me just shift these things out a little bit. And I do apologize in advance. I'm still nursing a bit of a cough. So if I suddenly run into a bout of coughing fit, do excuse me, I'll try to mute myself. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So this is my quick presentation. This is pretty much a work in progress that I have started quite some years ago. And I'm happy to show some results that we already have. And before I go into the talk proper, I'll just like to acknowledge my collaborators actually. So I was fortunate to have an undergrad for a one-year project, research project. And he pretty much did most of the work here. So I'm the one presenting, but the groundwork was actually laid out by him. And also I have two collaborators from Philippines, Associate Professor Cheryl Yap at the University of Philippines, Los Baños. So she's actually based in the College of Agriculture and also a curator at the Museum of Natural History there within the university. She and her lab was instrumental in getting a lot of the resources, getting me into collecting over there in a bit. And out of that, we also had one of the undergrad solo who actually started the species checklist that I'm going to present over here as well. So these are the people that were actually part of this project as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce a little bit about the Philippines. So it is part of Southeast Asia, right? So I'm based in Singapore since 2013, and I've been trying to establish, the diversity and the distribution of, especially assassin bugs in this region. And Philippines came about out of coincidence. So this opportunity came when Professor Cheryl Yap actually reached out to talk about collaborations. So Philippines archipelago, this is the second largest archipelagic country in the world. It has over 7,000 islands. It's right at the northern tip of Southeast Asia, right? And it actually is close to Borneo, the down south in the southwestern side, and then Sulawesi on the other end as well. It is considered a biodiversity hotspot. It has high species endemism, all the way from plants, mammals, reptiles, and on average, it's about 50% endemic species found there. But unfortunately, of course, a lot of the old growth is gone. So the estimate is about 7% left, and most of it has actually been cleared for human activities. Geographically speaking, it is, of course, very, very interesting because of the origins. There are composite island arcs. There's also a continental Palawan block. And given how seismically active and volcanic activity is present, and as well as it being right smack in the middle of the typhoon zone, right, you can imagine how the environment there is actually very, very actively changing all the time. So I had the opportunity to go down to Philippines myself back in 2016. And I visited the campus in Los Baños. So the University of Philippines actually modeled after the UC system in California, right? So they actually have different campuses, and the Los Baños campus actually came out of what was historically the College of Agriculture. So the agricultural studies and research was very well developed there. And by and large, the entomological collection of Philippines is actually situated within the Museum of Natural History there. It has pretty much the largest collection within the Philippines itself. So from there, we actually did a little bit of collecting within Philippines. So we went to two places within Luzon, which is the main island where Manila, the capital, is. So UP actually has a land grant space where they actually bring students there to do some field work. And that is in Paete on the further right-hand side of Luzon. And Mount Makiling, which you may have seen in some of the specimen labels, is basically where the campus of the UPLB Los Baños is situated. It's actually at the foot of the dormant volcano. So these were the two places that I managed to do some field collecting. So I'd just like to share very quickly about the two places. right? So the Paete, the UP Laguna land grant itself is actually a very, very vast stretch of land that was actually historically cleared for, of course, timber and other natural resources. So the topography there is actually quite hilly. And unfortunately, of course, most of it is secondary regrowth. So we did have to cover quite a bit of area to do sampling around that. Right, but of course, we were actually assisted by the rangers there, which were very, very helpful and of course instrumental in us surviving in the wild. And of course, lodgings and accommodation there were actually quite basic, but we got along pretty well for about a week of sampling. So over there, we did Malays trapping, light trap, pitfall traps, active collecting, whatever that we can bring along in terms of instruments for this short trip there. We didn't have internet access, so what you see at the right-hand side is actually a hillock where people gather just so that they can connect to the outside world. And I think that was a time when the US elections between, I think Obama and Trump was. So the second place was back in Mount Makiling. Sorry, there's a bit of a glitch. Right, so this is the volcano, right? And right at the foot of the top right-hand corner is actually the campus. And this has been historically actually pretty well collected, right? So the bottom area has been used for forestry. They were trying to grow mahogany for timber extraction. The higher up areas were a little bit better in terms of the forest vegetation cover. So here we hiked up all the way to, I think, the Aguila base as high as we can. And same thing we repeated in terms of trapping, Malays trap, light traps, pitfall traps, and whatever that we can find digging through leaf litter, right? So here, as mentioned, we have, they actually have a place called a mud springs. And this was actually where I managed to find my little Physiodorine that I described back in 2017. So it's a very nice feeling to be able to go to a type of locality and find the species that you described running around. So I do recommend that to everyone as much as you can do that. So this is the team of Solo, Ace, Flash. These are the students from Cheryl lab. And we were actually able to do quite a bit of collecting in this area too. Right, so how many species do we have in Philippines for reduviates, session bugs? This was my initial goal, right? Going down there, trying to find out the diversity and knowing that we do have actually a nice collection there to start off with, and on top of it, the field material that we managed to gather. So this was the starting material that I had. And with a little bit of background about work that has been done, past workers, mostly Stiles work in the late 1880s. There was a huge production of species described back then. And then subsequently, there was McAtee and Mallock with Amazines in the early 1920s. And then subsequently, thereafter was pretty much most of Miller's work in the 1940s or 1950s. Those were the huge peaks that you see in the graph. And that's where most of the species were described. And but of course, there has been an increment in terms of number of species altogether. Right now, we have up to 231 species described from the Philippines. And the last 5 was actually just added last year, 2022, by our co-organizers here, Stephanie and Christiana, together with David Reddy. Right. I was also curious to find out about collectors, like of all the materials that were described. Interestingly, there was only a small handful of collectors that the species described were based on, right? And some of these were back in the 1800s. Charles Fuller Baker is one of those collectors that you might have seen in a lot of the different collections, especially in US collections. So he was actually based in the Philippines College of Agriculture, which is now UPLB, for quite a few years, I think 9 years altogether. So a lot of the species that he collected was pretty much from Mount Makiling and the rest of Luzon. Along with that, later on, we have Victor Gaput, who was based, he's an entomologist, and he's based in UPLB for the later part of the 1900s to early 2000. So in terms of collection, actually, there was actually very few collectors throughout. And if you look at the localities, they are actually pretty much mostly in Luzon, a little bit on Mindanao, right? And what is mostly missing is actually the middle islands. The Visayas area is actually very, very poorly sampled as of now. Based on the collections, I managed to bring back a lone representative. So what I did is I went through the collection, took out what I think to be unique, distinct, interesting material, and I brought it back to Singapore for further studies. And that was about 152 specimens examined. We're happy to say that we've identified 124 to species level, 26 to genus, so it's still pretty much in work in progress. And we have 2 only to subfamily, which I will go into a little bit later. And from here, the idea is basically to create a reference collection whereby with this properly verified and examined and identified specimens, we're going to bring it back to UPLB, and then we can use this as a basis to help curate the rest of the specimens that were there. Most of them pretty much were quite similar, but I'm pretty sure I might have missed out a few, so I'll take a look back again when I go there. But this is actually also a very good representation of the diversity that we see there, in the sense that a large amount of them are Harpactorhini, the subfamily, followed by Stenopodini, and then we have a bunch of Atricodiini and Paratines, right? And then the rest of them are well represented in one form or another, but species diversity is, of course, a little bit lower. So pretty much is dominated by Harpactorhines over there. And that's no big surprise because it's, it's a tropical and subtropical climate. So from the identifications, we have 7 new species records for the Philippines to report. And these are, out of them, I think 4 Harpactorhines, 1 Reduvine, 1 Paratine, and then 1 Triballocephaline, which is now, of course, a Atricodiine as well. And within these 7 new records, we have 2 that are actually introduced species, right? Amphibolus venator and Peregrinator biannulepis. These are well-known assassin bugs that are associated with agriculture. So their native distribution are definitely not in Oriental or in the Philippines. And of course, what we figured is it's most likely due to transportation with the grain products. UPLB itself has a lot of association with agriculture. So, and I think if I remember correctly, these were actually found nearby within that area too. So here is my mystery bug number 1, right? I call it Harpactorhini SP for now. And I'm actually asking if anyone has any idea what this is, because we have absolutely no clue. We've run through as much as we can in terms of the Harpactorhini genera, right? And I've reached out to Tadashi Ishikawa, thinking that he might be the best person to know if he can recognize this, and he has no clue as well. So we are still scratching our heads. I'm still trying to work out and narrow down as much as possible. If in fact this is already a known genus at least, if not, we might have something interesting here overall. It has a very slender head, body, has a very extended forewings, right? So it looks pretty distinctive enough that we think if it has been seen before, it should have been described somehow. So we're still trying. The second mystery bug is not as exciting because it's one of those rhinoceros-like things, right? So one of the challenges we had for Harpactorhini identification here is to deal with some of the poorly defined genera that we have encountered. And one of the groups, what we consider the rhinoceros group, is a big issue, right? Trying to figure out the genus limits, right, is not easy. And we've seen both from Stiles' work and Miller's work, they are relatively simple, right? So we are trying to redefine and as much as we can understand the ways that they have circumscribed this genre. So in this case, we have one, we're still not quite sure yet because Rhinoceros is, as you know, a pretty large genus. So running through and trying to eliminate out all of them does take a bit of time. Out of which Sphodorhinitis is an endemic genus that Miller created. Most of the species initially were described under Rhinoceros, and then Miller decided that they are unique enough to be called on its own. But when we look at the type image specimen, type species and the type species image of Sphodorhinitis, a lot of them don't really match up very well in terms of the consistency of how they look like. So we're still trying to decipher that as well. And of course, out of that, one of the idea is to create a species checklist, right? So that we can have a starting taxonomic reference to go off with. And this is, of course, based pretty much from Maldonado's catalog, as well as the species that were described thereafter. And then in addition, we have the new 7 records that we have worked through based on the collection that we have examined. And I do apologize, I have no idea how to present a species checklist well for 238 species altogether. So it is a bit of a number. So what I've done here is just created these columns. They are really tiny. If you squint your eyes, you might be able to see in case you're interested in looking at the species diversity here, right? So this is my effort in trying to present a species checklist in this case. Right, so moving on from there, we wanted to do a bit more than just to report a species checklist. And what we have decided to do is to build an identification key for the Harpactorhini genera within the Philippines. And the rationale is that we actually do have a good representation of them based on the specimens that we have loaned out from UPLB and collected, right? And out of which Harpactorhini genera actually represented quite a substantial number of the total general diversity within Philippines. So if we are able to, take a step into it, we're actually making good headway into improving identification resources for Philippines, both at the genus level and same thing as well as the species level, because out of the 238 reduviate species we have, 86 of them are Harpactorhines at least. So we thought that this is a good area to, go into straight away. So with what specimens we have, and also based on available illustrations, type images that the Heteropteran Systematics Lab in UC Riverside has been accumulating, we're actually fortunate to be able to get access to that as well. We decided to create an annotated pictorial key to aid identifications. It's still going to be dichotomous format, just to keep it simple. And we want to use as much of the accessible external morphology as possible so that for the non-specialists, they are still able to help with identification, especially now that, iNaturalist is such a big thing going on in terms of spotting interesting taxa out there. So again, I do apologize. I'm not sure how to present a dichotomous key for 42 steps. So I'm not going to show every single thing, but this is just a good example of how we decided to do it. So the annotation is there. We try to make it as simple as possible. Every single step, we try to include multiple characters and not just rely on one, just in case, for example, if the antenna breaks off, you can still use other characters as well. So that was one feature that we wanted to make sure that people do not get stuck in any of these key steps. Annotation as much as possible. Images, wherever we have specimens, we do take our images. Otherwise, we use what is available on literature, and sometimes line drawings could be it. Sometimes the type images might be available, and then we use that. And sometimes it might be online. For example, Stockholm has a lot of styles, original the species, so we actually take some of the reference from there as well. So this is another example here, right? So we keyed out by grouping the Harpactorhini genera as much as possible in the beginning so that it makes sense. So for example, we have the large chunky ones, which are Sicanus, Phemius, Agrosphodrus. So we take them out as soon as possible. So we try to make it as intuitive as much as possible and to keep the number of steps as minimal as possible. So we're happy to say that out of with 42 general, we're able to keep it to 41 steps. And that's pretty much it. So in conclusion, I just want to point out that Philippines is actually highly undersampled, right? We have specimens mostly from Luzon in the top northern corner, and then some from Mindanao, but still, quite a bit of stuff is still missing there. But really the Visayas, the Palawan area in the middle is really undersampled. So if anyone is interested in going there, I do encourage people to go, do more collecting. And from there, other than knowing what we have, my idea here is that we do need to build up more accessible taxonomic resources. It does help to improve identification. It is quite painful for us, honestly, when we were trying to do the identification for general, going back to all the original species description. And out of which, the hope is, of course, with better identification resources, it can help to generate more species discovery as well. And that's all I have today. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.